How are we, guys? We're going to be checking out some of the synths and effects that I use, all the VST plugins that I mainly default to when I'm looking for whatever it is in production. So follow along, and I know some of these you probably won't have. You don't have to get all of them, obviously, and I know I'm doing this right after the Black Friday sales. It's not a good time, but again, it's just important for you guys to sort of know what I'm working with. So if you feel like it, you can get it too, and I'll tell you the ones which are more important to me. So diving in, we'll get to the synths first. Obviously, for most of my sound design, I use Serum. I'm not really going to get into that. You guys know about Serum. I don't really use any other synths. I've tried Vital, and that's about it. But yeah, I'm comfortable with Serum, so I like using it. Now, for getting that fluttery sort of effect, like a real Imanu style one, Quanta is a really good plugin. You essentially drop samples into here, into this one, and then it'll split it up into these grains that it like repeats. So that's a really cool one there to make these sort of fluttery sort of effects on samples. Now the next two is Geica War Island and Intimate Strings. These are both from Spitfire Audio. So Geica War Island is sort of like a bass generation plugin. You can flick through the presets, and it's just basically, it's essentially like a sampler in some sense, but yeah, it's good to have some pretty cool basses. I don't use it too much. It's I feel like that, if you've used some of the sounds in it, you sort of get bored of it after a while, so get it if you want, but yeah, I still have it. Intimate Strings, really like this one. This is great for like your string instruments, that sort of violin sound, to get like a really organic, nice one. Now the good thing about Geica War Island and Intimate Strings is that they're like $30 each, so compared to getting like a string plugin from Contact or something, which you may pay $100 for, it's pretty good. So that's mainly it in terms of synths. I use a lot of sampling as well, so we'll get into the vocals. Now, for the vocals, most of what I have is stuff from Waves. So the first one is CLA Vocals. This is a godsend of a plugin. It's essentially got some low and high EQ bands. It's got a bit of compression, a bit of reverb, a bit of delay, and a bit of stereo there. So it's essentially like a one-stop shop to run your vocals through to get them sounding better than they are. And I've never run any vocal through this and it hasn't come out sounding a bit better. Now, moving on from that, I've got the CLA 2A. I did put this in the vocal section, but this is essentially just a really good compressor. It's one of the most popular plugins in Waves from what I know. And yeah, it's a nice compressor. It doesn't really like hammer the sound too much. Now, the de-esser, this is a really good one. You essentially just pull this down as the input signal's coming in to a point where it's just ducking down the S's. It's really good at getting them out the way and not really reducing other stuff in the vocal. The J37 tape here, again, this isn't really one that's meant to be in the vocal section, but it essentially just gives you that tape sort of feel. I've only just gotten this actually, so I need to dive more into that. Now, Ovox, again, another one I've just bought. Need to dive into it more, but it's kind of cool for getting these weird synthy sort of sounds onto your vocals. So, yeah, if you're looking to make vocal synths, I'd definitely give that a go. Vocal Rider. This one is really... Sorry, let me just close the door. Washing machine is going hectic. This vocal rider essentially, like in real time, will move this volume slider up and down depending on sort of the settings you give it in. So it's essentially doing what a compressor would do, but it's not compressing. It's doing volume automation, but it's doing it dynamically and by itself, which is really cool. If you have like a lot of volume variation going on and you don't feel like manually going and reducing and automating in the volume yourself, this is a really good one to do that with, and it's not going to compress it. It's doing something similar, but I think it's a little bit less intrusive. Waves Tune, similar to Melodyne and FL Studio, is just a really good plugin. You have this on and you hit play, it'll run the vocal through here, and you can move the pitch or the notes up and down on them. Pretty standard there. I think it's good for when you have singers that aren't hitting notes the best. Another one is the waves tune real time. So this is a similar thing, except this one essentially just does it in real time. So, you know, if the note is sort of straddling between two when they sing it, it'll choose it to put it on one. Now, I haven't dived down into all of the scale sort of stuff here too much. But again, I think this is just a cool one. You can chuck it on. Usually it'll sound a lot more on tune than what it was. D-doubler here. I think this is a free plugin, if I believe, but it's essentially a vocal doubler plugin. So you just have the amount there and the delay here. It's for those of you who don't know what vocal doubling is, it sort of essentially gives it a feel of there being more stereo presence and of there being two vocals, like a double of the vocals. And then the last one is Goyo. I think this is a free plugin as well. It's essentially a voice separator, so it can take out the static or room sounds from the reverb, actually, over here, from the vocals. So if you sort of recorded some vocals and there's some wind in the background, I think it can help you out with that. That's it for vocals. We'll get on to distortion. So there's 4 main ones I use for distortion. Actually, there's 5. I forgot about trash. Add trash in there. So the main one that I've always used is Trash 2. You guys would have heard about this one. It's just a really well-known, bit of an older plugin, but you know, just a lot of people have used it. It's a good plugin. It's great. It's got all these presets you can just chuck on, and it'll like beef up the sound. I've just bought Rift, actually. I've used it like once, so I don't have much to say about it. But I've heard good things about this, so I'm keen to give it a go. Thermal is another really cool one. You can just flick through all the presets on here. One of the things I like about Thermal is that even if you don't feel like getting into the actual sort of controls here, again, you can just use the presets and see what comes out, but it has a lot of like really weird effects, and you can often like, instead of just getting like beefiness and distortion out of sounds, you can often like run things through here and a bit of weird stuff comes out, which is pretty cool. Similar to Portal, which I'll get into later. Now the next one is Soundtoys Decapitator. This one has just like a really nice warm sound to it. It's you know, it's not as intrusive if you just sort of like drive up into it and use some of the parameters here as some of the other distortions. You know, you can just give it some light saturation, but you can also run through the presets and get different tones out of your stuff. And then the last one is Prisma. Again, I haven't used too much of this. I believe it's free, but this splits it into low, mid, high, mid, and high. So it's a 4-band, multi-band effect plugin. And it also allows you, for each of these bands, each of these is a plugin. So you essentially can use 16 of the inbuilt plugins, which when you click on something, they come up. So this is a really cool one if you're doing sound design sort of stuff, to sort of like really hit each band in a different way. You know, you can, it's not just distortion too. You can also do stuff like add width, gain, bit crushing, all that sort of stuff, so, and filtering down the bottom. So that's a really cool one to get. Again, it's free. For sidechaining, you guys will know from the other videos, I use Shaperbox. I essentially just draw in here and then sort of have my sidechain like that, and then I trigger it with MIDI. That's the main reason I like it. Another one is LFO Tool. Again, most of you probably know about this already. It's just a really classic plugin. More used for the sort of house and techno sounds, just because they keep that consistent 4 of the floor. Here you go. It's like sort of beat there. Moving on. Limiting and soft clipping. The main one I use is K-Clip 3. So I chuck this on all my buses and I chuck it on my master as well. And that just allows me to get that clipping happening so that it's not going red through my output. Which is actually, I was clipping through the Ableton output for about 1.5 years. And this was up until a few months ago I was doing that. But one of the problems I found with that was that because my monitoring plugins, which I'll get into later, were on the master, essentially what was happening is the unclipped signal was going through my monitoring plugins and then getting clipped by the output. So I wasn't actually visually seeing the loudness and the frequency spectrum accurately, because I wasn't hearing what it was going to sound once it had been clipped by the Ableton output. So I've actually stopped doing that, and now I use the K clipper because it's not as intrusive as clipping just through like the saturator, the inbuilt saturator in Ableton. I find that it does it a lot more more mellowly or nicely, and you can push a little bit more into it without completely messing the sound up. And then of course the Pro L2 is just a really good, well-known limiter. I don't use limiters that much, to be honest. Like, I prefer to just push into soft clippers, but again, it's good to have there. Depending on where you're at with your production or what you want to do, limiters are good. I know they're not used as much by people anymore in the electronic scene in terms of, you know, just chucking limiters on your master and stuff. A lot of people prefer to soft clip now, but again, yeah, we all need limiting sometimes, so Pro L2 is a good one. Now for EQ, of course I use the EQ8 on Ableton, but my favorite one is the Pro Q3. It's just a lot more user-friendly. You can take a lot more different peaks and stuff, but also the fact that you can do the mid-side sort of stuff, so you can just affect the stereo, or you can just affect the mid, and you can really be a lot more surgical with how you do it. There's different modes and stuff like that. It's just a really good EQ. I would say if you don't have this, this should be your next purchase. It is probably one of my favorite, like top 5 ones. Gullfoss. Now, this is a dynamic EQ, so when you run signals through here, it's going to do, if you have Soothe, which I'll get into as well, I'll do these side by side. So Soothe and Gullfoss are both dynamic EQ, so when you run a signal through them, they will adjust it depending on how the algorithm sees fit, and that can change depending on the presets you use or sort of what you do with the curve. I know Gullfoss is a little bit less, you can maneuver a bit less. So with Soothe, for example, if I wanted the bass to be affected more, to be ducked out more in real time, I would push this up like this. But in Gullfoss, you just have recover and you have tame. So recover is essentially, it brings up signals that it thinks are too low, and tame is it pushes down signals or frequencies that it thinks are too high. And then Soothe is pretty similar. Out of these two, I would recommend getting Soothe 100% over Gullfoss. I use it a lot more than Gullfoss. It's also a lot less CPU intensive, and I just find it's a nicer plugin, and it has more applications and stuff, and you can dial it in a bit more. Again, top 5, I would definitely get Soothe if you don't have it. It's pretty pricey, but it's worth it. It's really, really good for getting stuff out the way. Another cool thing about Soothe is that you can actually sidechain with it. So I didn't have it in the sidechain section up here, but I'll talk about it. What you can do is if you chuck Soothe on an instrument, for example, you can sidechain the signal from the vocal to the instrument. So I'd go in here and do sidechain, input it from my vocals, and then turn on the sidechain here. And what it'll do is it will, in real time, duck out just the frequencies that are prominent in the vocals out of whatever channel you have it on, which would be, let's say, a bass or an instrument or a guitar. So I found that it's like a precision, dynamic, you know, way to sidechain stuff out the way of each other. A similar plugin is Trackspacer, you guys may know of, but this does what Trackspacer does, but it does it way, way more surgically. So just something to keep in mind there. Again, another reason why Soothe is so good. Now, in terms of like sound design and pitching sort of stuff, now when I say sound design, I'm not talking about synths. I'm talking about things that really affect the sound. The first one I've got is Manipulator by Infected Mushroom or Polyverse or whatever it is. Essentially, this one, it has like pitch and it has formant shifting and it has a bunch of other things, but you can flick through the presets. This really mangles up the sound. Another one like this is Portal by Output. Again, flick through the presets. These things just like really do weird stuff to the sounds. And if you're looking at doing experimental sound design where you just run things through plugins and see what it spits out, they're really good to get a lot of like warpy, weird things that you wouldn't get anywhere else. Now, another one is Crystallizer from Sound Toys. This one is sort of like a grain, well, it's a granular echo synthesizer, that's what it is, but it's sort of like a grain synth / delay. I haven't used this one too much, but I know it can add some really cool like sort of delays and stuff that really give sounds a bit more character. I would say it's probably better off used for things like pads, arps, that sort of thing, as opposed to like basses and like lead sounds, but still a really good one. Little Alta Boy, this is a great one mainly to use formant shifting for. So if you're trying to do formant pitching, I'd say like Little Alta Boy and Manipulator are the two ones that you want to do for that. Also has some cool presets that you can use in there. Disperser, this is part of the Kilohertz bundle. There's a few ones I'll show you that I have from Kilohertz. I have Pitcher as well. So I'd recommend getting that bundle. It's like $10 a month. Essentially, wherever you sort of isolate the frequency, it'll sort of give this like pinch or this like almost this like extra like prominence of that frequency, but not in the same way as like EQing that frequency up. It does something weird. It's hard to really describe what it does, but it just adds a bit of a different texture to your sound, which is kind of cool. And then the last one is Kilohertz Pitcher. This is the best plugin I've found for pitching up and down because it has a fine tuning thing and you can fine tune the grain size down. So essentially what this allows you to do is in real time you run something through it, and if you want it to slowly ramp up or ramp down or do whatever you want with pitch, it will do that, and it's not going to be jumping from one semitone to the other. It's a continuous pitch modulation. And it does it well, you know, and you can bring down the grain size. So if you're using like sort of short, more transient oriented things like drums, you do a low grain size so that the grain size is smaller than the instrument that it's actually trying to variate the pitch on. Now for monitoring, standard ones, I use Span and for my frequency spectrum analyzing. And then for my loudness monitoring, I use Ulean. Now both of these are really well known. They're both free. Highly recommend. For stereo, Side Widener 2 is my favorite one. It just like, from all the widening plugins I've used, this one seems to retain the mono compatibility the best. So I would highly recommend using Side Widener here. It just like, if you have a sound and you want it to have some more width, it's just good to do that without like completely compromising on the mono signal. And then last ones for transients, it's Transify and Kilohertz Transient Shaper. That's the third one I have from Kilohertz. I actually have the whole bundle, so when you pay the $10 a month, you get like 20 different plugins, but these three that I've shown you are the main ones I use. Now, the Kilohertz one is really good, so if you just want to like boost the transient or reduce the transient, it's really good to just flick it on. It's simple, low CPU, chuck it on. But if you want to dial it in a bit more, this one from Joey Sturgis Tones, Transify, is really cool because it's a multi-band transient shaper. So you can actually, if you just want there to be more click on a kick, for example, you can boost up the attack or the transient just on the tops. Or maybe you want there to be a little bit more punch in the mids, so you would do that. And maybe there's a bit too much punch in the lows, so you would like reduce that. So that's cool that it's a multi-band transient shaper. Now, those are mainly what the VSTs are that I use. There's obviously some others that I want to look at getting, but those are the ones that I default to. In terms of stuff in just Ableton, like what they already have, it's usually like the EQ8, I use a lot, the saturator, I use the glue compressor sometimes. And obviously you want to use that sort of stuff where you can. Obviously the reverb and delay, you know, all those basic ones I use quite a lot. But yeah, I just wanted to get into the VST ones that I use for these different sort of aspects of mixing and sound design and distortion and all that sort of stuff. So thank you guys for listening. I hope this has given you some guidance if you're looking for some new things to buy. Again, it's a lot of stuff, but I've collected these over years and years and years of producing. So, you know, just find ones that you are really keen on, try them out, and then slowly get more as you go. Don't go and spend all your money on all of this straight away. Cheers, guys. I'll see you in the next video.